Welcome back, everyone, to another edition of Rudy's Rant. Powered by Come On Now, the podcast. I am your host, Rudy Rodriguez Shoma, and this is Rudy's Rant, where we press facts over feelings. Thank you so much for everyone that just jumped on with me this evening on our live podcast. Greatly appreciate y'all jumping on with me for the hour. I've been wanting to get this video done, but I need to get some time to put my thoughts together because naturally, I'm a Miami Hurricane fan, and y'all know that by now. And what happened last night in the college football playoff is an absolute bona fide disgrace. It's a disgrace. But before we jump in, thank you so much for your continued support of our channel. Be sure to like, subscribe, follow, hit that bell, pound the like button, become a member. Membership lives are every Tuesday night, 9 p.m. Let's talk about this crap, man. Look, you don't have to hate, you don't have to like the Miami Hurricanes. I don't care if you hate them. But the reality is this. The Miami Hurricanes, since 2005, the program has been a train wreck. They've been 500 or just above or just below almost every season outside of, I think, a handful, maybe 5. They've won 10 games once since 2005 until this year. And it seemed, and when I grew up, the Miami Hurricanes, you either loved them or you hated them. There was no in between. And what we've seen with the Miami Hurricanes, because they're good, and everyone knows they're good, and everyone knows they're dangerous, that hate has permeated back to the surface. Tell me why exactly there is this profound love affair with Alabama. You cannot explain it to me. Why? Because Alabama has been the most dominant program, arguably in college football history, over the last 15 to 17 years, since Nick Saban took over. It was like 16, 17 years ago. Dominant. Always gets the benefit of the doubt. When they lose, there's a reason. There's always a reason. But they're never held accountable for when they lose. So when they lost by 21 points to Oklahoma, who was awful this year, and they only dropped 6 slots in the rankings, I had this feeling that Alabama would end up in the playoffs by simply winning one game. Now think about that. Ward Manuel, the commissioner or leader of the college football playoff, he can suck my dick. He's a joke. He's a joke. How Alabama drops to only 14 and a week later is in the top 11 because they beat a bad Auburn team 28-14 at home is laughable. It's insulting to people's intelligence. The Miami Hurricanes suffered 2 very unfortunate losses in the past 4 weeks because they've had a bye week in between. But they suffered a loss at Georgia Tech, in which Georgia Tech ran the ball down their throat and controlled clock and kept the offense off the field. A game in which Myra Cristobal turned down not 1 but 2 field goals within 40 yards and went for 2 on one particular situation. So Miami would have had a 30-28 lead. Instead, they lose 28-23 when Cam Ward fumbles on a strip sack. Now, Georgia Tech is good. Why doesn't Georgia Tech get the benefit of the doubt for the fact that they lost 2 games with their starting quarterback injured? Why? Why not? Why don't they get that benefit? Because they're not really a 7-5 team. They're probably a 9-3 or an 8-4 team. One of those losses was to Notre Dame with their third string quarterback. You know, so that's not the real Georgia Tech squad. Now, that same Georgia Tech just damn near beat Georgia in Athens, but lost in 8 overtimes because the officials in that game ensured that Georgia won. Don't believe me? Go watch the film. There was a play in the third quarter where a Georgia Tech player clearly stripped the Georgia running back, clearly stripped him. Replay showed it, and they said there was not enough evidence to overturn it, and the call stood. Bullshit. I watched that replay 500 times. It was clear as day. So what happened? That fumble happened inside the 5-yard line. Georgia scores. So now they have 7 points. Their next drive, their very next drive, 4th down play, I think it was 4th and goal, and they call pass interference on Georgia Tech in the end zone. DB didn't touch the guy. It was not pass interference. So instead of Georgia losing the ball, they end up scoring again. All that said, Georgia Tech scores, makes it 27-13 with just over 5 minutes left. Now, Georgia Tech has to have some ownership. I didn't like the way their defense played that next possession, which allowed Georgia to score so quickly to make it 27-20. But then, final possession, Haynes King runs the ball down the middle. He gets flat out speared. Targeting, clear as day. Linebacker for Georgia goes head first, head down, head first in. This is Haynes King's jaw, his face mask, right into his face mask. And Haynes King fumbled the ball. He lit him up. They did not even look at it for targeting. They didn't look at it. If you had at least looked at it and said, we don't deem this targeting, I don't agree, but I can swallow it. They didn't look at it. All they looked at was to see if it was a fumble. And then Georgia ties the game. Now I think Georgia Tech got in their own head in overtime with their 2-point plays. Didn't understand why they didn't run the ball. They're a running team. Their misdirection is so hard to freaking contain. And they should have won that game. But they went 8 overtimes with Georgia on the road. And now all of a sudden Georgia's a world beater? This is the same Georgia that beat Kentucky by 1. That was tied with Florida with 7 minutes left and their third-string quarterback in the fourth quarter. Like, these are facts. Alabama struggled for 55 minutes against South Florida. Miami beat South Florida by 35 at USF. Alabama loses by 21 to Oklahoma. Alabama loses to Vanderbilt, 6-6. And they lost to Tennessee, a good team. Not a great team, a good team. I'm not going to sit here and say that Georgia's not good. I'm not going to sit here and say that Alabama's not good. I'm not going that route. The way other people want to go the route saying, Miami doesn't deserve it, they didn't earn it. Why? Is it because the subjective media ranks SEC teams better, even though they might not be? Let me give you a point of emphasis. They're quick to point out that Alabama was 6-0 or still 6-1 against teams with a winning record, and Miami was 4-2 against teams with a winning record. Right? How about this? Why do you ignore the fact that they were 3-2 against teams with a losing record or 500 or worse? Because Oklahoma and Vandy finished 6-6. Why aren't you saying that they're 3-2 with teams that are 500 or worse? Why? Why do you ignore that part? Because Miami against teams that are 500 and worse are 4-0. Miami, their gap of victory was like 17 points, which is top 10 in the country. Miami leads the country in offense. Most yards, most points. per game. And it's not close. Miami has a Heisman candidate, probably the best quarterback in the country. I think he's better than Shedeur Sanders, but if you don't, then he's number 2. Jalen Milroe stinks. Stinks. Jalen Milroe scored 3 points at Oklahoma. 3. Alabama schedules Mercer in week 13. Alabama schedules Auburn to finish the year. Auburn stinks. And in between, they have Oklahoma, who also stinks, and they got ramrodded. They got destroyed. So the Mercer win is bigger and better and acknowledged as something incredible, while Miami losing to Georgia Tech by 5 on the road, and Syracuse, who features the number 1 passing quarterback in the country in Kyle McCord, a guy who last year led Ohio State to an 11-1 season. If Kyle McCord was the Ohio State quarterback this year, Ohio State would be undefeated and win the national championship in a runaway. The fact that Ryan Day disrespected that guy to see what Kyle McCord did at Syracuse, Kyle McCord is a baller. Fran Brown's a great coach. Syracuse has a really good team. And if Syracuse was in the SEC, they'd be ranked in the top 15 at 9-3. Did Syracuse have some rough losses? Absolutely. No different than Alabama. No different than Ole Miss. No different than South Carolina, who lost to Kentucky. 4-8 Kentucky. Kentucky, who lost to Florida 48-20. The Florida that Miami blasted in Gainesville 41-17 with their first-string quarterback. Not their backup and not their third stringer. Not the third stringer that Georgia played. Ole Miss lost to Kentucky. No, Ole Miss lost to South Carolina lost. Hold on. Ole Miss lost to Kentucky. I'm sorry. Ole Miss lost to Kentucky. Ole Miss beat South Carolina by 24. But then Ole Miss lost to Florida. Oh, shit. Miami smashed Florida. Like, what? And Ole Miss lost to LSU, who's not ranked anymore. They were ranked at the time. But Ole Miss has a big win over Georgia. That said, South Carolina lost to Bama. South Carolina lost to LSU. And South Carolina lost by 24 points to Ole Miss. They did beat Clemson. They did beat Missouri late in the year. They beat a Texas A&M that's overrated. They struggled with Old Dominion, though. They only beat Old Dominion 23-19. Like, this is the problem. Like, Miami beats Ball State 62-0. Ball State beat Northern Illinois. Northern Illinois beat Notre Dame at Notre Dame. Do not tell me that there are not massive flaws in this entire system. Texas avoids every tough team in the conference except for Georgia and gets whipped in that game. Indiana plays only Ohio State and gets whipped. Now, I think Indiana should be in the playoff. Penn State loses to Ohio State and beats nobody the rest of the year. Shows how inept they are offensively in an Ohio State game. But this guy, Ward Emanuel, is going to come out and say that nothing can change? Why not? Why not? Why is it that now all of a sudden in a 12-team playoff, we ignore potential losses in a conference championship? Why have the conference championship game then? Why even have the game? If SMU loses, why should SMU drop behind Bama? I think SMU is going to crush Clemson, by the way. But if they were to lose, why should they drop behind Alabama? This is what Ward Manuel said. Look, I'm a Hurricane fan. I want Miami in. I think the country really wants Miami in because, one, the matchup of Miami-Notre Dame is the biggest matchup of the entire playoff. It would be bigger than the championship game. The ratings for that game would be through the roof. The storyline would be incredible. Cam Ward is elite. He's must-see. And you'd rather have a team that scored 3 points versus Oklahoma and tell me that they're better than Miami? So you're running this gut feeling thing again that you did against Florida State last year, where you fucked Florida State, who was undefeated, a conference champ, that won the conference championship convincingly, despite the fact their quarterback was hurt, because they had elite defense. But you said then that because they didn't have a quarterback, we're going to drop them behind Alabama, who needed a miracle play to beat Auburn, and yes, had a great game against Georgia, no question about it. But guess what? They then lost to Michigan. They lost. As expected. It was a good game, but they lost. Do you think that FSU would have fared differently? I don't know. I know that FSU's defense was elite. I know that FSU shouldn't even been the 4. They should have been the 3 or the 2 seed. That's my feeling. But this is what we do now every year. We fuck the ACC. Fuck the Big 12, fuck the ACC, and fuck everybody else. You've got 5 right now. Texas, Georgia, Bama, Tennessee. Is it 5 or is it 4? Let me check. You got Texas, Georgia, Tennessee, Alabama. You got 4 SEC teams. You've got 4 Big Ten teams. You've got Notre Dame, who gets to schedule Bupkis all year. Bupkis. They schedule Bupkis. Don't tell me that Army and Navy are good opponents. Stop it. Don't want to hear it. This entire thing of independent football, fuck that. Everyone should be independent going forward. Schedule your own schedule. USC stunk. That was a Big Ten team. Former Pac-12 team. The fact of the matter is Oregon's a Pac-12 team winning the Big Ten. Texas is a Big 12 team winning the SEC. And SMU is an American Conference team winning the ACC. All of them a year ago were in a different conference. So don't sit here and tell me that the SEC is elite. Is it a good conference? Sure. But like everybody, it has its warts. And you can't lose to 500 or worse teams and get blown out by one of them 2 weeks ago and have this man come up here, Ward Manuel, say, well, Alabama just, they look better. And then use stuff like they were 6-1 against teams that were winning records. Whereas Miami was 4-2 on the road against bowl teams. But Alabama was 1-3 on the road against bowl teams. Who's more cut out to win a road game? A team that scores 45 points a game and goes for 538 yards a game, or the team that scored 3 points at Oklahoma just 2 weeks ago? The team that lost at Vanderbilt. The team that this season has scored over 45 points once against Western Kentucky and Mercer. 52 points. 28 versus Auburn, 3 versus Oklahoma, 42 against LSU, 34 Missouri, 17 Tennessee, 27 South Carolina, 35 Vanderbilt, 41 versus Georgia, 42 versus Wisconsin, and 42 versus South Florida. Miami scored 38 or more in 11 of 12 games. Their lowest scoring game was 23, and they scored more than Alabama did in two games. Their lowest scoring was better than Alabama's two worst scoring games. And it wasn't that Miami played poorly. It was that they didn't have the ball enough because they only had 8 possessions in that game. I watched the games. Ward Manuel doesn't watch games. They don't watch film. Miami is electrifying offensively. Electrifying. Ole Miss, God bless you, Lane Kiffin. You lost to Kentucky. Bro, you lost to Kentucky. At home, no less. You lost to Kentucky. You can shut the fuck up. I don't care who else you beat. But that's the same way Alabama should have been treated by this committee. Because Ole Miss's 28-10 win over Georgia was an annihilation. I watched that game. And that game was not that close. It could have been 42-10. But then they went a week later and lost at Florida. Oh, shit. Miami beat Florida 41-17 in the same building in Gainesville. South Carolina, you lost to Bama, bro. I watched that game too. That 27-25 wasn't really the score. The game realistically should have been over, but a player decides to score. It should have just been, the final score should have been 20-17. I think it was. Should have been 20-17. But because the player decides to score, it gave South Carolina a chance that they shouldn't have otherwise had. Nonetheless, it was a close game, but it wasn't some well-played game. And it was a week after Alabama had lost to Vanderbilt. End of the day, why even have a tournament or a playoff if this is going to be a Big Ten or an SEC Big Ten tournament? 67% of the teams in this playoff right now are from the SEC and Big Ten. While the 3 other conferences get 1 team, and then Notre Dame. Notre Dame has an automatic bid no matter what. It's absurd. You lost to Northern Illinois, bro. I don't care who you beat after that. Your loss to Northern Illinois is the worst loss of anyone in the entire field. The worst. So we don't judge losses anymore. We judge only wins. We ignore the bad losses. Miami's 2 losses are not bad losses. They're unfortunate losses. They're not bad losses. They suck to have lost to Syracuse, but Syracuse scared the shit out of me. I thought Syracuse would be 9-2 coming into that game, but they got upset by Boston College, 37-31. But I'm going to sit here and I'm going to argue Miami to the end of days. Did Miami screw itself? Absolutely. They screwed themselves. They should never have lost that game, either of those games, actually. And I think Mario Cristobal fucked them over in that Georgia Tech game. But end of the day, it doesn't matter that they screwed themselves by not guaranteeing them a spot. You expect a committee to act above board, a committee of 13 people or whatever it is, and actually watch film. But let me tell you something. Let's take a look. And I'm going to give you this. This is the SEC. When the season started, had 9 teams ranked in the top 25. 9. Of those 9 teams, 7 of them dropped. 7 of those 9 are ranked lower today than they were ranked when the season started. 7 of them. What does that tell you? That tells you the SEC is over fucking rated. Overrated. 1,000% overrated. In fact, Oklahoma, Texas A&M, and LSU are not ranked. They started the year ranked. They're not ranked. South Carolina jumped in and they became ranked. So the only teams that went up in the rankings in the SEC were Texas, Tennessee, and South Carolina. Everybody else dropped. Everybody else. So their conference was overrated. But also consider the fact that when subjective biased voters vote, many of whom are from the Southeast and are SEC biased, there is this built-in bias that says that the Southeast Conference has the best conference. Might it have the best conference? Sure. I'd argue that the Big Ten was better. The fact that I hear podcasts saying, well, if Indiana goes and plays Georgia, they'll get crushed. Why? The 11-1 Indiana that scores 44 points a game is going to get crushed by Georgia. You mean the team that just beat Georgia Tech by 2 in 8 overtimes? The same Georgia Tech team that you're using against Miami for losing to that team? Is that what you're telling me? The same Georgia that beat Kentucky 13-12? But Indiana's going to get blown out? I think Indiana caught their medicine at Ohio State when they made one mistake that changed the whole game. The drop punt stat. Changed the whole game. And because they had not been in a difficult situation all year, they didn't know how to handle it. But why would Georgia crush Indiana? Have you watched Georgia? They're not that good. They're good, but they're not the Georgia of last year or the year before or the year before that. Stop using history as the determining factor of today. If Georgia loses to Texas and they're ranked 5th, for what reason, I have no idea. How you move up winning an 8 overtime game against a team that people all largely now, because you can't say that they're mediocre when Miami played them, but now they're great. So a team that people largely consider mediocre, you went up in the rankings. Ohio State loses to Michigan and drops to 7, 8. They're guaranteed a home game, losing at home to Michigan, a team without a quarterback, a team that stunk this year, a team that was a 21-point dog. It's absurd. Ohio State, with that loss, should have dropped to 14 or 10 or 12. Miami should be ahead of them right now. Will Howard ain't better than Cam Ward. Ohio State's offense is not better than Miami's offense. And look, Miami's defense, for what it's worth, regardless of what people think, got stops in most games when they needed those stops. The only game this year that they did not get the stop they needed was against Syracuse. Because against Georgia Tech, they got the stop. They just did not score to win the game. But even in those games where they struggled against Virginia Tech, Louisville, and Cal, they got the stops. Against Duke, they fell behind 28-17 and outscored those motherfuckers 35-3 the rest of the way. And Duke is 9-3 and a good fucking team. Just because they're Duke does not mean that they're not a good team. But because they're Duke, they're not ranked to start the season. Syracuse wasn't ranked to start the season. The fight you have to go through to get in the rankings for the ACC is outrageous. They got to fight. They got to claw. They got to be undefeated for 5 weeks. In week 5, Pittsburgh was on the outside receiving votes. In week 6, Pittsburgh was on the outside receiving votes, 27. In week 7, Pittsburgh was 5-0. It took them 5-0, 7 weeks to get ranked. And they were ranked behind 4-1 Kansas State, 4-1 Missouri, 4-1 Oklahoma at the time, 4-1 Boise, 4-1 Utah, 5-1 A&M, 4-1 LSU, 4-1 Notre Dame, 4-1 Clemson. I mean, the list goes on. It took SMU the same shit to get. They were 5-1. The loss being the BYU at the time, undefeated. The fight that these teams in the ACC have to go through to get ranked, they cannot afford to lose. Because the second they lose, they plummet. Miami loses by 4 on the road in a tight game to Syracuse and drops 8 spots. 8 in rankings. Don't sit here and tell me that the AP and the coaches' polls don't matter. They matter. Because the College Football Playoff Committee uses those polls as a barometer. Whether they admit it publicly or not, they absolutely use it as a barometer. You don't see a team that's ranked 22nd in the AP poll end up 12th or 10th. You don't. In the CFP, you don't see that. Those polls matter. And the fact they come out beginning of the year and 9 SEC teams are ranked, while only 4 ACC teams are ranked. And 3 of those 4 are still ranked. 3 of those 4 are still ranked. Actually, it was Clemson, Miami. You go back. Clemson, Miami, NC State. Sorry, 3 ACC. I'm sorry, Florida State. So 4. And then Florida State was a disaster this year. Could never have envisioned FSU going from ranked 10th to 2-10. Never. And NC State. And then you got 2 more in, which are Syracuse and SMU. Miami's finishing the season right now ranked higher than they started, because they started the season ranked 19th. Clemson's 14th. I think they're 19th or 18th now. FSU and NC State dropped out, but now SMU's ranked in the top 10. And Syracuse ranked in the top 25. And you have 2 teams in Louisville and Duke that are literally sitting at 27 and 26 and 28. But Miami didn't beat them. They're not ranked because of subjective voters. So they're not looked at the top 25, even though they're 26th and 28th. Come on. This is a flawed system. And look, Miami did hurt itself. But it's the job of adults in a room who are making a decision to stop being biased for Alabama. This is an Alabama rule at this point. Alabama will always get the benefit of the doubt no matter what the fuck happens. You cannot look at me with a straight face and say this team that lost by 21 points 10 days ago is better than Miami, who lost by 4 at a 9-3 Syracuse. You can't. Winning should matter. The games you play, the schedule you play, you're not making that schedule. Outside of your non-conference games, you're not making that schedule. In fact, if you want to be real about it, compare Miami's non-conference to Alabama's non-conference. Miami played FAMU and Ball State. And Alabama played Mercer in week 13 and played Western Kentucky to open and played South Florida in week 2. And Miami beat South Florida on the road by way worse than Alabama beat South Florida in their home building. They have common opponents. And Miami beat those common opponents worse. Facts. And Florida beat a bunch of teams in the SEC, including ranked ones when they played, including Ole Miss, who whitewashed Georgia. Wiped them out. My hope, and this is my hope, it's not going to happen more than likely, but Ward Manuel opening his mouth and stating nothing can change for these teams on the outside because there's no data points left, that is a flawed ideology. Because if Georgia gets trounced, fuck trounced, if they lose If they lose to Texas in a de facto home game, the SEC championship is in Atlanta. It's an hour from Georgia's campus. Pretty sure that's about as far as it is. An hour. It's a de facto home game for Georgia. If Texas beats Georgia, how are you going to sit here and tell me that another, you have 2-3 loss SEC teams in this tournament? Really? 2 of them? So where would Georgia drop to? 10? Oh, I'm sorry. They lost to Alabama. So would they drop behind Alabama, but ahead of Miami? Would that really happen? Because they're not going to drop from 5 to 7 or 5 to 8. And that's if they lose. What if they get beat by 3 touchdowns or more? It's possible. They got wiped out by Ole Miss. They were down 30 to Bama when they played them. What happened? They were down 27-13 to Georgia Tech and 17-0 at halftime. What if they lose? What if they get blown out? Are you telling me, Ward Manuel, that you will not drop Georgia outside the top 12? Is that what you're saying? Then why have these games? Why have them at all? What's the point? To see that UNLV gets a second chance versus Boise State? Or that Clemson gets an unearned, undeserved chance to play SMU and potentially win their way into the Final 12? And then what happens to SMU? Do they drop out or do they drop to 10? Because I think Clemson overall, that's my opinion, I don't think Clemson's that good. That's why I don't think that win by South Carolina means all that much. Because I don't think Clemson's that good. They're 9-3, but I don't think they're that good. I think Miami would beat them by 3 touchdowns. Why? Because Clemson's offense isn't that good. Miami struggled with 2 things: dominant running game, dominant passing game. If you were just in the middle on both, they didn't struggle with you all that much. They may have fucked around and let you be in the game, but they didn't struggle. Outside of Cal, the Cal situation was a matter, they just gave up a lot of big plays. And it was so convenient. The game was at 10:30 Eastern Standard Time at Cal. Who the hell plays a 10:30 at night game from the East Coast on the West Coast? You play the game at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, but not when it's Miami. You play them in the middle of the night for where they live. I went to bed that night at 2:30 in the morning. I'm sorry, the game ended at 2:30 in the morning, that game. But ask yourself that question. Him saying that makes these games. Why would Oregon and Penn State play starters? Why? Why risk injury? If nothing changes anything, why risk injury? Oregon can lose. They're undefeated. But Penn State, their schedule is trash. And the one game that they played was Ohio State. They lost at home. So if Miami's schedule is trash, well, so is Penn State's. And Penn State didn't play a tough road game all year. Not one. Not one. And if Penn State was to get beat by 30 by Oregon, why wouldn't Penn State drop out of the top 12? Like, this is, I'm posing genuine questions. Because can you then look at Miami's resume to Penn State's? Can you look at Miami's resume to Georgia's? Yeah, they have the common opponent, but Miami played on the road. Georgia played at home. Miami would have beaten Georgia Tech on their home field. My opinion, of course. Miami beat Florida way worse than Georgia did, and Miami did it on the road. Georgia did it on a neutral site, played a third-string QB, not the starter. I can do this all day, but I can also see the other side. This other side that is just wholly biased and brain-fucked and manipulated by the fact that Alabama's Alabama, and they think in their mind, because Alabama's been good for so many years, that Alabama's good enough now, even losing by 21 10, 11 days ago. to a bad Oklahoma team. It was one thing if Oklahoma was 10-2. I actually could swallow it. But they're terrible. A week later, Oklahoma got blown out by LSU. Blown out. Ward Manuel should be ashamed of himself. And I hope that in the next few days, while they watch these games, that at the end of the day, they recognize and realize that maybe they made a mistake. Because last year, they sure as shit fucked Florida State over. And Florida State, going into their conference championship, was in the top 4. Let's take a look real fast. I want to refresh my memory. Because last year, 2023, going into week 14. Week 14, Florida State was ranked 4th. Week 13, Florida State was ranked 5th. Week 12, Florida State was ranked 4th. Week 11, they were ranked 4th. Week 10, ranked 4th. Fourth in week 12 CFP, 13, they were ranked 5th. 14, they were ranked 4th. And all they did was win their conference championship in week 15 by 10 points, shutting down a really good Louisville offense. And Alabama goes from being ranked 8th. 8th. They went from 8th after beating a bad Auburn team on a miracle play. Another miracle. Remember that game? It was 4th and goal from the 30. The miracle win at Auburn, and they're 11-1. They have a loss, and they beat Georgia. They sure as shit, they beat Georgia by 3. Not by 30, not by 20, by 3. And Georgia drops to 6th. Team that was number 1 all year drops to 6th. And Bama jumps up to 4th and passes an undefeated ACC champion who did exactly what these motherfuckers and these fraud fucks in the CFP said is the most important thing. The first thing is a team that wins their conference championship game and is undefeated is not going to move down until it happened. Until it happened. And FSU got fucked. And I think that fuckery fucked up their season this year. I absolutely believe it played a part in why they were so bad this year. And then Texas jumps to 3, Washington to 2. And FSU is fucked at 5 and plays Georgia, and their whole team goes on vacation and says, I'm not playing, fuck this shit, and gets blown out the building by Georgia. I went to the game. Georgia had a lot more players playing in Florida State. Florida State had a JV team out there. It's absurd. It's absurd. Because that same Alabama lost to Texas by 10. That same Alabama struggled versus South Florida. That same Alabama, had some struggles in certain games. And they are overlooked. But FSU loses their QB, but their defense is elite and shutting people down defensively, and they get the short end of the stick. And this year it's happening again. This time it's to Miami. You want to say you're surprised, but you're not. In fact, I'm actually more surprised Miami wasn't 15th. I'm more surprised that Miami didn't get completely fucked over and put behind everybody. But if you tell me that Georgia loses to Texas and is still in this thing next week, I'll tell you this. If Georgia wins, they're in. Texas is still in. That ends the conversation. Because to me, that's Miami's only hope is Georgia losing to Texas. But if Texas loses to Georgia, they don't have a win over anybody. And they've lost to Georgia twice. But they beat Oklahoma by 30. Who beat Bama? It hurts my soul that Mario Cristobal ruined a Lamborghini. And I blame him as a Hurricane fan. He ruined a Lamborghini. If you told us from the beginning of the year, Miami goes 10-2, are you happy? Of course, we would say yes, because we've been bad for so long. But we also didn't know how good Cam Ward was. We also didn't know how good our weapons were with a quarterback of his ability. Because we haven't had a quarterback worth shit in years. We didn't know how good Damian Martinez was. He's a truck. Our offensive line is very good. And then you started seeing it, and you're like, your expectations and your what you think is great it changes. You're 9-0. You're scoring at the most prolific rate in University of Miami history, folks. This is the highest scoring Miami Hurricanes football team ever. And I had someone tell me that Ken Dorsey was better than Cam Ward. No, the fuck he wasn't. Those Hurricanes teams that Ken Dorsey played on, I love Ken Dorsey. Leader. Couldn't throw the ball like Cam Ward. Cam Ward's going to be a top 10 NFL draft pick. Ken Dorsey couldn't last a year in the NFL because he threw a duck. He had no arm strength. He had college arm strength. He didn't have pro arm strength. And he also played with ballers at Miami. And I love Ken Dorsey. But I'm not delusional. Cam Ward just broke every single season record at the University of Miami. He is the greatest quarterback Miami's ever had. Kelly, Testaverde, Kosar, Walsh, Erickson, Torretta, Dorsey, the best. Like, Cam Ward is special. And you had a Lambo in your garage and you blew it with some bad coaching in the Georgia Tech game and clear lack of preparation for Syracuse. But all that said, they should still be in this fucking tournament. And unfortunately, if they're not, Cam Ward and these guys who are seniors and going to turn pro probably won't play in a bowl game. And if they don't play, then the Miami Hurricanes would be better off turning down a bowl game. There's no point in playing. Because now you would have gone from being 9-0 and then losing 3 of your last 4 games. Because they'll lose a bowl game if he can't play. If Restrepo says I'm not playing and Damian Martinez says I'm not playing, and if Isaiah Horton turns pro, if he says I'm not playing, well, then Sam Brown's not going to play? Like, if they all decide they're not going to play, then why play? Why expose yourself and get embarrassed the way Florida State did? I thought Florida State should have said, fuck this. When their players all said, we're not playing, they should have turned that Orange Bowl bid down. I thought that was a mistake, and I thought that's affected their season this year. Look at what happened. Miami was a 500 team last year, and Miami had a top 4 recruiting class in the country. They lose to Syracuse, and they're losing recruits going 10-2. That's insanity. It makes no sense. If they were in the playoff, would those guys have changed their mind? Probably not. I'm hoping, I'm praying. But obviously, if this guy Ward Manuel, I'm gonna say this. If I'm on that committee and I hear Ward Manuel say that shit, I'm coming back and saying, what is wrong with you? Are you out of your fucking mind? Even if it's true, are you out of your mind? Why would you say that? There's still games to be played, you dumb fuck. You basically told the world that this process is over. You basically told the world, you basically told the world that it doesn't matter if you lose in the conference championship, you're still in, unless you're Clemson or UNLV. Can you imagine Boise State right now? Boise State, who's already beaten UNLV, but Boise State, they lose, they're going to be out, and fucking UNLV's in. It's crazy. UNLV will be in. That doesn't have much effect on this because Boise will drop out and UNLV will be the 12, and Arizona State or Iowa State will be the 4, and SMU will end up as the 3 if they win. But to me, if Georgia loses big, they should be gone. And that's my feeling. And I think that should have been left for the possibility of happening. Because you can't tell me that Georgia is going to drop from 5 to 10 in a 3-touchdown loss. You can't tell me that's going to happen. You cannot tell me they lose by 3 touchdowns and drop only 5 slots. If they lose by a point, they probably don't fall out. And there will be 2, 3 lost teams from the SEC in this shit. A fucking scam. An absolute scam. I will say this. I've always been a proponent of a 16-team playoff. This 12-team shit is stupid. It's just as stupid as a 4-team playoff or an 8-team playoff. It's stupid. It should be a 16-team playoff, and the amount of teams per conference should have always been capped. Period. It's not a tournament if the whole damn tournament is 2 conferences. What makes the March Madness special? Everybody has a shot. Everybody. Small conferences, big conferences, everybody's got a shot. If Clemson was to beat SMU in a 16-team tournament, then there should be 3 ACC teams in this thing. But you should cap it. Why is it not capped at 3 per conference? It's a 12-team tournament. You're already giving away a spot to Notre Dame for free. This is basically a Big Ten SEC challenge. And I do hope that if Notre Dame plays Alabama, they kill Alabama. I hope they kill them. And I hate Notre Dame. I hate Alabama more. And I hope that Ohio State gets ran through. Ran through. And they're going to get a home game after losing to Michigan. Fuck out of here. That's all I got. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Appreciate you. I'm sure there's plenty of you Miami haters who just want to fucking shit on Miami because that's what y'all do. That's your right. It's real weird, though, that Alabama became more popular and more beloved as they became more dominant. Whereas Miami, as they kicked everybody's ass, they became so hated. And now that they're good again for 1 fucking year, they're hated again. That's all I got. I'm going to go to the comments. This is Rudy's Rant. Facts over feelings. Come on now.